Human cyborgs. Nothing but fantasy or a potential reality. How long can a human being live for? For thousands of years, people sought to find an elixir of eternal life to halt nature's ticking clock. The subject has returned to the stage once more in the 21st century. This time, scientific laboratories are joining the hunt. But instead of seeking a fountain of youth, they are focusing on the power of technology to achieve immortality. This is one of the formulas designed for the fight against aging. The substance is called the Skulachov ion. It is named after its creator, Vladimir Skulachov. He heads the Department of Genetic Engineering at Moscow State University.
We first suggested this idea in 1972, but it was not until 2005 that we put the whole formula of age fighting on paper.
According to Dr. Skulachov, oxygen is, of all things, one of the most dangerous substances in the human body. He says that when cells become oversaturated with active forms of oxygen, they become oxidized, and this leads to an early death.
The body produces poisons. One of the most malicious poisons is generated at the heart of each cell, in the mitochondria. On the one hand, they supply the body with energy. On the other, they gradually kill us. The older we are, the more poison we have in our bodies in the form of free radicals.
Some time ago, Maxim's father came to the conclusion that there is a mechanism which makes cells age. He theorizes that a new biological process is set in motion immediately after a mother gives birth. This process makes the body destroy itself.
Given that aging is programmed, it can be stopped like any other program. In that case, ailments characteristic of old age will be nipped in the bud. We won't age.
This unique footage taken by a digital microscope reveals the nature of human mortality. In the second minute of the video, a sudden flash marks out a dying cell, setting off a chain reaction that kills off nearby cells.
A death signal is received by neighboring cells in this experiment. They realize that the cell died only a moment ago. Its death was not accidental, rather it was the result of a process. The signal went right across this tiny island of cells. It's really quite an unusual sight.
Dying of old age was uncommon in ancient times. People would usually fall victim to wild beasts or their enemies. But later, people came to believe that immortality could be found in faraway lands. The Arab scientist Ibn Battuta learned about a fountain of youth in China. Alexander the Great believed that it was in India. One theory claims that the real reason he undertook his famous campaign in the Indian subcontinent was to look for the waters of life.
Abkhazia is a republic on the southeastern coast of the Black Sea. In Soviet times, many people here lived to 100 or more. More than 270 centenarians lived here in the mid-20th century. There was even a choir composed solely out of the very elderly in the republic. Only those between 70 to 100 years of age were allowed to join. The choir mostly sang old Abkhazian songs to the accompaniment of traditional instruments. Now the choir's members are younger than the previous generation.
I'm 81 years old. My singing career spans 65 years. Sometimes I even sing when I'm at home. My wife scolds me. She says, "Why on earth are you singing? Stop that mumbling." I say, "A tune is racing through my head. I need to sing all the time," I say.
In the 1970s, a resident of Abkhazia, Makhti Tarkil, became the main character in a documentary about centenarians. Mahdi told the filmmakers that he poured icy water from mountain streams over himself several times a day throughout his life. Mahdi was certain the water cleansed people of everything wicked.
Are you really over 100 years old?
109.
Would you like to share the secret of your longevity?
People must know how to take care of themselves. Healthy habits help them.
To demonstrate that a 109-year-old Abkhazian is just as capable as the youngsters, Mahdi Takil mounted a horse unassisted as the camera crew looked on. His destination was the neighbouring village of Duripsh, where one of his great-grandsons was celebrating his wedding. Interestingly, almost 40 years on, people in that village still remember the event.
I remember Takil very well. I even recall the good time we had during his great-grandson's wedding. My grandsons were there too.
Vladimir Vikvava is 93 years old now. He has spent most of his life here in Duripsh. Vladimir worked on a collective farm before his long absence from the village during World War II. He retired many years ago, but he still works in his orchard every day. He grafts sprouts of new varieties onto old trees. These apple trees are going to get a new lease of life soon.
I would say it's about time for me to die and lie in the earth in peace. But no. Life still gives me the strength to be on the move. Would I see anything new after I die? Will I? Don't think so.
Unofficially, the main body of lawmakers in Abkhazia is an assembly made up of elders. All of the country's historic decisions have been made in this meadow in the village of Lukhny, from the abolition of serfdom to the recent decision to declare Abkhazia's independence.
Old people gathering here would make a decision on any important issue. Their rulings became law for the entire people.
During the years of Soviet government, several international groups of scientists came to Abkhazia to find out what made people here live so long. Their conclusions were intriguingly simple. Here, old people last longer simply because they are always aware of the fact that they have a role to play in society.
Sending centenarians to an old people's home is a disgraceful idea. They should be allowed to live in the homes where they were born. They should be cared for and loved. That's what they need. They should be made happy, and they will live a long life.
Countess Elizabeth Batory of Hungary bathed in the blood of 650 young serf women every day. The 15th century French Marshal Gilles de Rais dismembered more than 800 peasant children at a laboratory in his castle to avoid aging.
As it turns out, the 20th century dictator Joseph Stalin was also anxious about his mortality. He had 5 cottages built in Abkhazia in the vicinity of a locality inhabited by generations of old agers. Legend has it that during a stroll near his dacha, Stalin met a 120-year-old local man. He asked him whether it was true that the magic rivers of Abkhazia could prevent aging.
The old man said there were no magic rivers, but there was a waterfall with healing powers. That prompted Stalin to visit the waterfall each morning. He washed there and drank some water.
Among Abkhazians, methods of fighting old age have been handed down from generation to generation. This is one of the oldest pagan rituals. During festivities, people boil the hearts of wild beasts in big tubs placed outdoors. Then the hearts are put on a broiling rack. It is believed that he who has tasted the heart of a wild beast strengthens his own. During a festive meal, elders get the biggest chunks. This custom is thought to give them strength and a long life.
He who takes gold inwards lives as long as gold itself, intones one recipe of an elixir of eternal life from the Middle Ages. Another is a ground-up mixture of a 1,000-year-old toad and a 10,000-year-old bat dried up in the shade. Taoist philosopher Zhang Daoling lived for 122 years as a result of taking such mysterious potions.
A true-to-life, immortal human being will walk the Earth in 2045. This bold claim comes from the Russia 2045 movement. In December 2011, its representatives demonstrated their first accomplishment on the hard road to immortality. This electronic arm is only the start of a process that hopes to finish with a fully functioning human cyborg.
We will meet again in 5 years' time. My double will be here, but I'll be in another room or at home. Yet you will still feel that you are talking to me and not my double.
Dmitry Itskov does not put his hopes in such dreams. Instead, as a successful businessman, he has gathered many scientists, doctors and inventors. Their chief goal is to create the perfect body and to give it soul and consciousness of a human being.
We hope that at some point we just have to perform a painless transfer of the mind. The person falls asleep and wakes up in another body where he feels just as comfortable.
Dmitry Iskov was inspired by the Hollywood film Surrogates. It shows the possibility of creating a human double, a surrogate cyborg controlled by the force of thought and imagination. That would be done without leaving one's home.
Computers and computer intelligence exceeds human intelligence. And then what happens? And that's sort of perhaps more the Terminator scenario. You know, what happens when the machines become self-aware enough to realize, hey, we don't need these people. And in fact, these people are kind of screwing up the planet.
Surrogates begins with a laboratory creating a replica of a human controlled by the human mind. The surrogates of the future cannot be distinguished from their human counterparts, but it's obvious that the first surrogates are a combination of man and machine. Kevin Warwick has volunteered to be a human cyborg.
First implant that I had, I've got a, here we go, this is show you what it looked like. So this was the first implant. That's radio frequency identification device, and that was implanted in my left arm, just up here, so pushed in at that point. And what we used this for was simply, as I moved around my building here in Reading, in England, the computer knew where I was at particular points. So it opened doors for me and switched on lights and said hello. And
having studied the experiences of those who use cybernetic limbs, Warwick agreed to more surgery. This time, a more sophisticated chip will be implanted into his arm's nervous tissue.
Operation starts at 8:30. A little bit nervous, but I think much more than that, a lot more excited than anything else. I really feel what we're doing now is a little bit dangerous, but it's actually doing some science, and we're actually going to change the way people think.
The operation lasted for several hours. Warwick was worried about whether the new device would be rejected by his body, but the surgery was successful. As a result, the scientist could subject himself to more experimentation.
One of the experiments I did was to drive a wheelchair around just from my neural signals. So it's the sort of thing that a paralyzed person could drive themselves in a car just by thinking about moving, if you like.
Robin F. Ekenstam, a Swede, lost his right arm a few years ago. It was he who was the first patient to test an experimental device called the Smart Hand. Scientists connected more than 40 sensors from this artificial device to his arm. They enable him to move his bionic hand and feel the touch of objects.
That pressure signal can be transposed to specific areas of the skin of the remaining hand. And if you find the right spots to stimulate, we know that also the correct areas of the brain cortex will be activated.
It took Robin only 1 day of training to learn to control the artificial limb as he would his own arm. To start with, he made the device stimulate the movements of his other hand. Later, he learned how to get it to perform operations on its own. More importantly, Robin even recalled how it felt when he touched something.
Now I can give orders from my brain to my body, which I haven't done in years. When you can control your movements, it's great. I haven't felt like this for a long time. When I take something and I can feel it, it is so weird because I don't have a real hand, but the fact that I can feel it again, it's indescribable.
Meanwhile, Kevin Warwick, the volunteer cyborg, has undertaken an even more ambitious task. This time, a symbiosis of living organisms and robotics. The experiment was based on the neurons of a rabbit brain. They were grown in a special incubator. The result was a mini brain consisting of a network of neurons fused together. Finally, the miniature brain was connected to a robot. Now the robot's brain is learning to solve simple tasks.
As the robot moves around, we can look at what's happening in the brain under the microscope. So as the robot learns to avoid obstacles, that sort of thing, we can see how the brain changes, that the connections between the neurons strengthen or weaken.
Reactions to such experiments vary from country to country. Lifestyles have not changed in Abkhazia's regions traditionally inhabited by long livers. The old men believe you can't live a long life unless you stick to the right lifestyle. They view any attempts at immortality based on combining man with machine with open hostility.
They seem to be set on compelling people to stop being human. It's a dangerous idea. People will no longer have the capacity for love, compassion, or charity. They will lose the ability to love their neighbors. This will be a dead end for the human race.
The Count of Saint-Germain at the court of King Louis XV is said to have helped Marquise de Pompadour look like a young beauty for as long as she lived. Old aristocrats claimed that the Count didn't age at all during the half-century that they knew him. The Count died in 1784. Others say people saw him in Venice in 1938, nearly 150 years later.
In the Soviet Union, there were secret laboratories in the country's major cities. Their research focused on ways of enhancing people's stamina for a global war effort. It was primarily aimed at naval officers manning nuclear-powered submarines.
How much more potential does the human body have? The answer is about 40%. Protein synthesis can be increased precisely by 40%. Human life too can be extended by 40%. That's what we are concerned with.
However, Soviet gerontologists failed to find a solution to a crucial problem. The average age of Soviet leaders before perestroika was around 80. Doctors could help keep their kidneys and livers in order, but their old brains were incapable of generating fresh ideas.
The bad thing about the Soviet Union was that its ruling body, the Politburo, consisted of people who had gone senile. Individually, they were smart people in their younger days, but when you have a group of 80-year-olds getting together, it's really not a productive thing.
Scientific fiction has already described cases of the brain living on after the body's death. An adaptation of Professor Dowell's Head, a novel by the Russian author Alexander Belyaev, has been screened many times. He wrote it in St. Petersburg, city where the Institute of the Human Brain was opened sometime later. Scientists there have developed methods of restoring functions of part of the brain after accidents or serious disease. But so far they are unable to get the brain of an aging person to generate the sort of ideas that they produced at a younger age.
Mathematicians and physicists normally have a field day before their 35th birthday or thereabouts. I can't recall a single significant piece of research done by anyone older than that. The only exception is Newton. He published his famous Optics when he was 70 years old. But, in fact, he wrote it 40 years beforehand, and I just shelved it until then.
However, today there are very few 30-year-olds among scientists championing the idea of life extension. Aubrey de Grey, one of the principal ideologists of the theory, will soon be 50 years old. Some time ago, he singled out 7 key elements of the aging process and formulated methods of remedying them. He maintains that human life could be significantly prolonged if so-called intracellular rubbish is removed from the body.
Repair is all about unlinking this process from this process. Getting to a position in which metabolism no longer causes pathology, because every so often we go in and remove some of the damage as if not so much metabolism had happened. And that is what we're all about. We think that this process is much more straightforward.
De Grey is confident that human life could be extended to 1,000 years, but step-by-step measures are necessary to prolong life with the help of restorative medicine.
The best way to think about it is by analogy with simple man-made machines, so cars or aeroplanes or whatever. We know that a car is built typically to last only maybe 10 or 15 years. But we also know that cars like that sometimes last a lot longer, sometimes 50 years, sometimes 100 years. And the reason they last so long when they do is because, for whatever reason, their owners fell in love with them, and they did an unusually comprehensive job of maintaining them, doing periodic preventative repair and maintenance to keep them in tip-top condition.
According to the Bible, people before the Great Flood normally lived for several hundred years. Adam, the first man on earth, and his son Seth survived for over 900 years. The man with the greatest lifespan was Methuselah, one of the forefathers of mankind.
I have talked with theologians as part of my study of the subject. Some say it's a matter of chronology. According to a different chronology, it's 90 rather than 900 years. There are also other theories. Some physicists go so far as to claim that a better concentration of oxygen in the air before the Great Flood may have been responsible for longer lives.
The laboratory of Moscow State University is designed to fight aging. Scientists experiment with a wide range of animals, trying to boost their lifespans. They study the effects of new medications on both the organs and the entire organism. One experiment aims to make the eyes of these rabbits remain healthy, but one of the most spectacular results has been achieved by administering special drops to rats. They have been named after the founder of the Department of Bioengineering, Dr. Skolachov. When the rats begin aging, their condition is in stark contrast to that of rats of the same age.
The rats that were about to set out on the journey to the other world could no longer move. They were in the final stage of aging. But there were other rats of the same age who had been fed on our medication and drinking water. They were still quite agile. They had not lost interest in life. These rats lived much longer than the control group.
As well as their current research, the scientists test their findings on themselves. Dr. Skolachov has even rid himself of several deep-seated ailments affecting his eyesight. However, those are only the first steps in a budding area of science. The crux of the problem is that scientists will have to find ways of cancelling the body's process responsible for aging.
Like physicists in France, for example, are not allowed to experiment with perpetual motion machines. Pharmacologists, likewise, are not supposed to look for a cure-all. But if we succeed in cancelling the aging program, we should be able to slow down all diseases resulting from aging.
Scientists wanting to find a way of extending human life are often seen as quacks. Vladimir Skolachov and his 4 sons hope that in 4 or 5 years' time they will be able to cancel or at least slow down our body's natural aging process. What is at stake is the scientific authority of an entire dynasty of microbiologists.
If I was doing research into immortality single-handed, I would be in a terrible rush. But I'm happy to know that at least one of these 4 guys here will carry on the work, and I'm happy.
Is it at all possible to cancel the aging process right after birth? Are scientists on the right track? And whose theories of what could be done to make people stay young longer will replenish the list of human illusions and dashed hopes. There is an ongoing struggle to convince people of the possibility of eternal life. It has its achievements and its failures. Having watched this documentary, you are now 26 minutes older.